So my presentation is about the steps in implementing an IPM program and what it looks like to do preventative versus rescue treatments. My name is Rachel Sporer, and I'm the Midwest sales rep for BioBest Sustainable Crop Management. Before that, I was a grower with an IPM program. Let's see if I can get my slides to move. There we go. Today, we'll first talk about why IPM and the steps to getting started. Then we'll relate that via a case study about roses and get two key takeaways about the preventative versus the curative treatments, as well as some challenges and some possible solutions. So IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management, and some reasons that people will choose to use this system of managing their pests is for healthier plants, produce, and people. You achieve that by balancing multiple techniques, so it's not all or nothing when it comes to beneficial insects versus spray treatments. It allows you to use bumblebees and generally protect pollinators. The bios can find the pests before our human eyes. They crawl around actually where the pests live and find them maybe even before your scouts. Leads to happier employees. I personally did not love spraying, so once I got to start releasing insects wearing no PPE, I was a lot happier with my job. And I know other people feel that way too, as well as less labor issues when it comes to REIs. You can have people working in the greenhouse while biologicals are being applied, beneficial insects, or low REIs on biochemicals when compared to conventional reentry periods. And there are, of course, other reasons that every grower decides on their own to implement an IPM program. Just some vocabulary about IPM. There are three categories people generally refer to: cultural practices, biological solutions, and corrective chemical treatments. None of this is hard and fast. There might be some overlap between categories at times, but for the purpose of today, the words I'll be using are a lot related to biological solutions. So that includes beneficial insects, biochemicals, and when we say mass trapping, we're referring to sticky cards as well as pheromones. This is kind of the meat and the potatoes of the presentation that will follow us through our case study. So these green flags over here are the steps. Of course, the first step is to review what has happened in previous seasons. You actually want to get this started, before you receive your first trays of plugs or, transplant your first plant. You want to look at what you experienced last season and what you used to control it, as well as the crops that are coming in this year and some risks that they might have, and what are their most likely pests also in your area. We can also identify what success means. So for different growers who are at different stages of their IPM program or with different types of growing facilities, you may want to not spray at all. I know people that have, 0 spray labels on their crop. You can also maybe say you want to cut back on your spraying. So, use bios for the first 6 weeks and then do a couple of spray applications before you sell your plant. It can also mean you want to retain more employees or be able to harvest on more days because of lower reentry intervals. So it can mean a lot of different things. And we want to identify that so we can look back and decide whether it worked or not. Then we start clean. So by the time the transplants arrive at your facility, you want to, have some idea of how you're going to treat them. We know that if pests enter a facility on transplants, it doesn't take too many days for the pests to breed in those plugs, and then they're spreading throughout your facility as you pot things up and move things around. We can combat that by doing a dip treatment that can attack a few different pests. So we'll talk more about the products you can use in those down the line. Then we apply bios early. So it is a bit of a different mindset when it comes to the preventative treatments. You may be applying some low rates of low cost biologicals before you even see the pest. And this goes back to the bios being able to find the pest before you might even know it's there. Then throughout the season, we are evaluating both the biologicals and the pests. So you want to scout on a weekly basis, and we're going to talk a lot more about that on the next slide, using not only just looking in the crop, but also sticky cards so you can get some data and some pest counts for your flying pests, as well as mass trapping, like we said, with the pheromone lures or just large rolls of sticky material. Then when we know it's there, we're able to respond early. We can use bios as a first line of defense. So when you first see that damage or that pest, you can respond with some bios. There's some really aggressive things that we can use on a curative basis, or move into using biochemicals as needed or as wanted, depending on the grower and what you have on hand. So review, start clean, evaluate, and respond. As promised, we'll talk more about scouting. It is one of the most important steps, although they're all as equally as important. You do want to make sure you get scouting in on a weekly basis as part of your evaluation. In my opinion, the best scouting is whatever you can repeat on a weekly basis. So it really isn't the best thing to spend 10 hours scouting one week and then 1 hour the next week if you're not able to cover your whole facility in some way. You want to select sample sizes of each crop, of each area, but really try to do what you can repeat on a weekly basis, season after season, with improvements, of course. You want this to be done by the same person or group of people that have the same language and idea about your thresholds. Someone's hair on fire type of issue might be someone else's. That's no big deal. A lot of it has to do with the balance of biologicals as well. As I said, you want to use sticky cards to get that quantitative data. There's no arguing with, we had 1 thrip on our card last week and we had 10 this week. That means your thrips are increasing. You need to do some sort of curative control, perhaps, if that's your threshold. The cards need to be counted on the same day every week so you can have that accurate data. If you miss 1 week and do it a day later, a day earlier, it's not the end of the world, but really prioritizing the same day every week is the best way to do it. And you can easily record that in an Excel file, whatever works for you. And there are a number of scouting apps out there as well, from a few of us biological companies, as well as a few independent apps. We're looking for damage in the crop, so that comes with discoloration, webbing, or chew marks. You can get webbing from spider mites, some exoskeletons of the pest itself, maybe the poop of the pest, or even the adult pest. The app that BioBest has created is called Crop Scanner, so that you can geographically mark the area in your crop where you're scouting every week and input data that way on your phone or tablet. That you would mark your sticky card areas. So that would be a part of the app or program that you use. You're going to have, your data points and then your sticky cards. So it's going to be 2 separate sets of data working together to give you an idea of what's going on. You can see that on these sticky cards, the insects look a little different than maybe what they look like in your crop. So you have to get to know what things look like on the card. So that is kind of the basics of how to get started. We've talked about the first couple steps there, and we're gonna move into a case study about roses and how it all comes together. We'll first talk about the pests. So when you're scouting, every week you're able to detect things early. You also can have, people that are in the crop regularly looking for things as you go. With this pest, it is, well, sometimes the first thing you see is this stippling of the leaves. You really want to catch it at this point. It is really important that you catch it early. We'll go into the next slides of what it can look like, but when you see this stippling, the first thing you do is you flip over the leaf. When you flip over the leaf, this is what it looks like from zoomed out, but then if you have a hand lens, which is an important tool for scouting, and you zoom in a little, you can see the adult pest, some of its feces, as well as these perfect circular eggs. So this is a two-spotted spider mite. If you zoom in and you see this where there are adults and eggs, the damage is going to increase quickly. There may not be webbing at this point, but there will be. This is still considered, early detection as long as it's not affecting the sellable part of your crop, but you really need to get some balance of biologicals in there at this point. Now, when it comes to preventative versus curative, using spider mites as an example, there are different pests ranging from more specific that are a curative solution that only eat spider mites, back to a preventative solution, more generalist pests that can stay alive maybe on pollen or a variety of pests. Sometimes the generalists are lower cost because they are, easier for the producers to make, or they've been being produced for a really long time. So for a preventative solution, we would start over here with a generalist. You would want to have these out in the crop in that start clean phase. So if we have roses, for example, we can anticipate that spider mites might become a pest. Almost anything can become a pest in roses. So this one's kind of too easy, but you want to, if you know spider mites might pop up, you would want to get something out there that can eat spider mites, but, move forward. But can also survive on other things. So that would be a Swirsky that can also eat thrips and whitefly. You're really covering your bases when you have a generalist out there. However, when you start to see that early detection, you need to get a specialist out there that's going to be really vicious and eat a lot of spider mites. So that is going to be, in the case of this pest, your Phytocoelus persimilis. Basically only eats two-spotted spider mite, and it eats a lot of spider mites in a day. So you can see how we're getting in the mindset of applying generalists early and then specialists later when the pest is detected. In roses, if you're going to get spider mites, you could get a small amount of the specialist every week and place it where those pests do pop up. So that would have been something discussed back during the review phase, and then started in the start clean phase, but also used in the response phase, depending on when you identify the pest problem. Now, when we get into late detection, we are going to scrap some of those generalists or maybe use less of them and use more of our budget on the things that are going to really control what we have present. With two-spotted spider mites, the late detection, when it starts to affect the sellable part of your crop. So those upper leaves are becoming stippled. These would be a part of, a bouquet or sold in a pot of roses. You're also seeing webbing on the ends of the leaves or the ends of the flowers. At this point, a lot of your bios aren't going to be able to enter the webbing besides that Phytocoelus. So you're going to have to maybe pull out some biochemicals. This is what you would see in your evaluation when you would start to call this a late detection. Bringing this back to scouting or marking, areas, you want to send employees out with some tape, perhaps some colored tape, so that they can, if they see some damage, they can put a flag on that damage in the crop and, call out the scout or the IPM specialist to take a look. You can also mark these via an applet crop scanner. Now for response, you still actually have a few options within your IPM program. If it gets too late to use those Phytocoelus, you can move into using a horticultural oil. Using Sufx oil as an example, or Suf Oil X, because that's what I used as a grower, it controls the pest. It will also harm the biologicals, but it has a really low REI. So once you apply this product, as soon as it's dry, you can get the Phytocilus back out there. So the example of spider mites, your response might be to spray the Suf Oil X in the area with the pest, and then the next day apply the Phytocilus persimilis to clean anything up that the spray may have finished or missed. So the Phytocilus finishes the job. And you can see how, you're using both biochemicals and biological insects as part of the response. It's not really one or the other. Using a biochemical does allow you to release beneficial insects. If you do step into some more traditional chemistry, you're going to have a longer residual effect on the biologicals. So you can reach out directly to your company reps, your chemical reps and your biological reps to determine, how to wean off those chemicals into biochemicals and then eventually re-release your insects. So now we've gone kind of through the starting clean, the evaluation, and the response for a pest outbreak using an IPM program. There's also diseases that can pop up, of course. In roses, powdery mildew is really common, as it is in a lot of crops. The early detection with diseases is important to know that some of them can show up differently in different environmental conditions. Of course, in the heat, powdery mildew is a fluffy white mold. You want to catch it before it's creeping up your stem. As far as early detection, you want to get it if it's just affecting the leaves. And then when it's cooler, it can actually look a little different. So this is where whenever you see that discoloration, you want to flip over the leaf and look for insects. If there aren't insects, of course, it could be nutrient or it could be a disease. So this is why it's important to get those eyes on your crop every week and you notice these minor differences. For diseases in roses, there are preventative options and curative options. These are similar in most crops. Of course, cultural and preventative options, we have sanitation as the first step. If you're reusing any pots or equipment or moving them between sections, you want to sanitize them. You can spray off pruners or carts that might move. You really want to keep people isolated to certain areas. Employees should never go from a high pest or disease area to a low pest or disease area. Your labor flow should always go from clean to infested. And that's part of that cultural preventative options for both pests and diseases. Of course, airflow is important. So not squeezing in every single plant you can into an area will help you prevent diseases, a lot of the foliar diseases. For some root diseases, you are going to drench or dip your plugs with a biofungicide. BioBest produces Asperillo trichoderma strain T34. There are other biofungicides and trichodermas out there that can outcompete some of those root diseases like Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Phytophthora, and then they can actually also strengthen the plant, strengthen the root zone, and help them with induced resistance against some foliar diseases as well, like botrytis. Then going back to our case study with the powdery mildew, cease is something that is a preventative biofungicide. So you don't actually have to wait for the mold to show up. If you have a crop that commonly has mildew, like strawberries or like roses, go ahead and spray cease on, as per the label recommends, on a recommended basis. Now we can still respond with a bio program. You don't have to pull out the big guns the second you see something, as long as you are getting that early detection. You can spray biochemicals like cease mixed with Millstop, which is the curative solution. So that way you are stopping the active growth of the disease as well as preventing future outbreaks. this will not really interrupt your bio program. So this is the ideal scenario. Or, removing the damaged plants. So if it's only a few plants that are starting the outbreak, just get them out there and try to save the rest of your crop. So maybe you would remove those few plants with the mildew and then spray the cease and mill stop for a few weeks everywhere else until you're out of the woods. So you can see how there's some overlap when it comes to biochemicals, and having these things on your shelf allow you to respond in different ways and get a little bit ahead of some of the problems rather than always being in a curative or response situation. Now that we've gone through the basic steps and a few examples, we can kind of bring it all together into how we go through the flow of an IPM program. So I put cultural here at the bottom, even before preventative, because these are things that you can think about all the time. Sanitation. I believe in cleaning out greenhouses in between crops, trying not to intercrop too much, and really fogging the area with a disinfectant, getting every nook and cranny you can. Labor flow, like I said, not having people go from a heavy spider mite area into a clean crop. Try to keep those labor, the employees that are working in the infested area in there all day, if that's where they're going first thing in the morning. Pruning is important for the airflow as well as removing damage. You can just cut aphids right out of the crop sometimes. And then exclusion. A lot of growers have the netting on their vents to make sure, thrips aren't coming in, or for fruit growers, netting that prevents spotted wing Drosophila is an example of some exclusion options. Then we prevent. So when the plugs arrive to us, they may be coming in with pests that we have no control over. That's when we're dipping our plugs. We are applying early treatments of generalists or even specific biologicals based on historic pest pressure or common pests in your crop. And then biofungicides to prevent both root and foliar diseases. Of course, things are going to pop up that we may never know about, so or be able to anticipate. Then we can use some specialist biological controls, so your whole bio program is not lost. You can also treat with biochemicals that are compatible with your biologicals, or things that you can release more biocontrols right after the spray. And of course, you always still have the option to move into traditional chemistry. So when you start with some stronger chemistry, you can't move backwards into biologicals as easily as you can when you start with biologicals. You always have the option to pull out the big guns if you need to. So this is kind of how we move from preventative versus curative in IPM program. Finally, the two biggest challenges that kind of encompass everything else that I see is usually the learning curve that causes people to maybe use some of the wrong controllers, or not apply things at the right time, or allow pests to get a little higher than you want, which leads to the economical issues where people, it is pricey to be using a bunch of biologicals and then either killing them with sprays or releasing them too late and the pest is already out of control. So by starting with the learning curve, we can solve, the economical issue. And the way to do that is empower a champion at your facility for the biological program. You can sometimes get too many cooks in the kitchen when someone really needs to, when there's a large learning curve. If you have one person specifically working on it, they're going to get quicker at scouting. They're going to learn what works best a lot quicker if they're spending more of their time on that. So allowing an employee who's interested in the IPM program to really take the lead, they can build their skills to manage the program. Like I said, scouting, learning how to look for biologicals, learning that balance between sprays and bio releases, and getting into that consistency with scouting. So figuring out what they can repeat on a weekly basis. That person then turns around and teaches the rest of your team after a couple of seasons. This person also works closely with the company reps, so they can build relationships with people like BioBest, BioWorks for, different products, fertilizers, because plant health really does include, does impact your IPM program. So just empowering that person to really seek all the knowledge, work with extension agents, and that's how you get the efficiency that then improves the economics. I've spoken to growers who have really evaluated this and, said that after about 6 seasons, you do start to save money with the biologicals. You are preventing pests and having a lot less loss, a lot healthier plants, and you do spend less money on your IPM program based on this grower's experience. There are hidden savings as well, like you're not spending as much money on PPE, maybe more employee retention. It costs a lot to train employees and then, have them leave after not too long. So having happier employees and people that have to suit up and wear less respirators, it will make your employees happier and save you money there. And then there's also ways to augment your biological control program, so you're not constantly having to reintroduce new biologicals. You can start to augment them in your facility. BioBest has a couple of food supplements for some of those mites, like pollen, or we have some moth eggs that feed some of our flying predators. So there are options to increase the insects breeding in your facility, as well as banker plant options. Once you really have things under control and have your system going and healthy plants, you can put some energy even into a banker plant program. So this is basically the overview of how to get started and how to kind of move through the program throughout the season, as well as some tips and tricks on how to overcome some challenges. Working with company reps and extension and researchers is definitely the best way to learn everything you can, just like this workshop. And you can reach out to myself or anyone else involved in the workshop anytime to get started. Thanks.
Okay, Rachel, hi. Just, yep. And I stopped the video.
Cool.